I've been going to Japan for 20 years, and there are 5 things that I wish I knew before my first trip. Not because they would have made my trip perfect, but I think it becomes the kind of trip that people can't stop asking you about. But every once in a while, you hear somebody tell a Japan story, and the whole room gets quiet. They talk about a curry shop where a master chef remembered them, a neighborhood that felt like it was stuck in time, a moment that wasn't on any list. And you think, how do I get that kind of trip? That's what this video is all about. So the most common itinerary I see is what people call the golden route. Tokyo, Hakone, Kyoto, Osaka, some variation of that. 2 weeks and every famous place checked off. But people will go and can't really even tell you what it felt like. The problem isn't the places, it's that they never really stay long enough to get comfortable. You land, you start to figure out the trains and how to get around, and then it's time to move on. You spend more days sort of in transition than experiencing where you are. By day 4, everything's kind of starting to blur together and you still have a week to go. So how do you fix that? One of the biggest things you can do is pick fewer cities and stay longer. Normally I say about 3 or 4 days somewhere instead of just 2, especially in a bigger city. When you do that, I think that can shift something in your trip. You can go back to the same neighborhood twice. You can find your spot. For me, it was this bicycle cafe that sells coffee and beer, which tells you everything I think you need to know about it. By the 2nd or 3rd time we went, she was checking on us like we were old friends.
Afternoon, everybody.
That doesn't happen just in a 2-day marathon to get to the next place. Having a second conversation, especially in Japan, that's another topic, but it can really open people up. And the trip that you actually want to tell people about when you go home really lives in those slower moments and not just on a piece of paper or on somebody's website. That leads me into the second thing, which is even if you slow down, you can still end up spending your time in all the same places that everyone else does. But before we get into it, I put together a free guide about all things Japan, and the link's in the description. Look. Fushimi-Inari, Arashiyama, Sensoji. Places like that, I'm not here to tell you never see them. But I think when you spend your whole trip moving from one big famous place to the next famous place, you're basically doing the same thing as everyone else who watched the same 10 YouTube videos you did, or Instagram Reels or whatever. And your trip ends up sounding exactly like theirs. So what do you do instead? There's a lot of places in Japan with their own unique vibe and character and identity, and those are usually just around the corner from those more famous places. A bowl of noodles in a neighborhood that normally you just walk right past. A shrine that has similar history, same feel, but none of the crowds of people. In a lot of ways, people don't realize that even though Japan has a lot of history, a lot of the famous spots are honestly just scratching the surface of Japan. When you start to realize that, you can start planning to find stuff that matches what you actually want to do. And I think that takes your Japan trip and the stories you'll tell when you get back home to a different level. Most people, I think, honestly figure that out too late or never at all. A lot of people plan their Japan trips around cherry blossoms or the fall colors. And I get it. It's gorgeous, right? Like, I'm not disputing that. But when you show up during the middle of a peak season, hotels cost twice as much. And I think a lot of the famous spots, to be honest, turn into like a theme park. I love roller coasters, but yeah, just being in those crowded theme parks is crazy. And I think if you've traveled, you know what I'm talking about. I think the idea of Japan in and of itself is like peaceful. Sure, some of the chaos can be a part of that in another way, but at least that's the version of Japan I've always had in mind. The things you might see on TV and animation or whatever, I think they exist. They're just usually buried under 1,000 of the tourists who had the exact same idea. So when should you go? I think there's some windows that people really skip and they're really slept on. Late May into early June, I think, is really underrated, especially a couple days after Gold Week ends. Prices come down and the weather is good before the rainy season. September, I think, is great. The summer rush from the international travel is starting to die down. Starting to get fall food. Fall festivals start to kick off. And especially some stuff that happens right before the October and November rush. So you kind of get to experience some of that before things pick up again. And I think February, like after New Year's, January and February might be the one that surprises most people. I mean, it's cold, can be cold, but I think the main spots, even in these, especially during this time, can be quiet in a way that during the more busy months you won't get to experience, unless you get up early or something like that. So I think the off season isn't like a lesser version of Japan by no means. A lot of time it's the version that people just never get to see. Even from there, it gets interesting because even if you get the timing right, a lot of people actually undo some of that timing with where they actually choose to stay. Most first time visitors are gonna book in places that are convenient. Shinjuku, Shibuya in Tokyo, Gion. And I mean, I get it, but you spend the whole trip surrounded by are, let's be real, other international tourists paying tourist prices, and you're probably gonna be eating at places that are overhyped. I mean, you're in Japan, but like you're not really in Japan. Where should you actually stay? What should you actually do? The key piece of advice I would say is stay somewhere outside of those main areas, but it's still accessible. So for like Tokyo, a place like Kagurazaka, it's got cool history, great food. It's about 20 minutes from Shinjuku or so. For Kyoto, you could do somewhere like Iwamoto-cho. I stayed in a dope Airbnb, but it's only like a 10-minute walk from Kyoto Station. One of the things I really enjoy is you get out of the hustle and bustle a little bit, and then in the mornings, you can take your time. Like I said, I like coffee, so you can go to a cool coffee shop and kind of watch the city do its thing. Watch it transition from, you know, evening into the day. The spots that usually make for the best stories are usually in small neighborhoods that are probably a lot more different than where you're from, especially if you come from somewhere in the West. So quick thing, if you felt like you found a spot in Japan that you felt like is yours or was yours when you were there and want to share, definitely drop that in the comments. It helps people that watch the channel and people who want to go and plan their own trips. If not, I get it, keep it to yourself, you know. You could just say, yeah, I got some. But yeah, some of the best stuff that I hear comes from people who watch, so thanks. This next thing is sort of a 2-in-1. It can cause you to miss out almost more than anything else on this list. I think you sort of have two types of people. You have people who are so worried about doing something wrong, offending somebody. They've read up all the horror stories. So if they walk into a place that they feel like is too local, they actually never really engaged, so they just completely miss out. They don't want to be seen a certain way. Or probably the more common, our friends on the opposite end, they don't care about the space or the people in it. They treat everybody like they should just be background noise. In either case, I think you have both of these types of people come back and say some version of Japan didn't meet their expectations. I actually once had a lady tell me, who I took over an itinerary for, complain that the hotel she stayed at in rural Japan catered more to Japanese guests, and they should have spoke more English. I had to think about that for a second, because you in Japan, man. I can only imagine what that hotel staff went through, man. So how do you resolve both of these problems? This might be a hot take, but I think just try. People notice when you're trying. Not trying to be perfect, just an attempt. A few words of Japanese, going back to a place to say how much you enjoyed it. You don't have to be perfect, but you don't have to act like my mom would say, you ain't got no home training. When I was in language school, one of my boys from back home came to Japan and stayed at my Japanese family's house, which is on like the outskirts of Tokyo. There's this bonsai shop that is near the train station that I passed every single day. Thought it was interesting, nice old couple that ran the shop. I don't know if I was scared about fumbling the ball or whatever, never went in. My boy one day comes home and he's like, hey, you gotta run back with me to the bonsai shop. So we do, I help explain what they're trying to translate for him. He didn't speak any Japanese. And from that day forward, every single day they waved at me on my way to school. And I think that taught me, just again, be respectful. He was respectful of the culture, wanted to know more. The other thing that people don't talk about is in Japan specifically, that can be the difference between a positive impression of a tourist and them not wanting foreign tourists in their store at all. Not only does it make for a great story, but I think it also builds a connection point that nobody else who probably in your circle would have. And there's so many of those opportunities that are like that in Japan. So I'll say one more quick bonus point. If you really want to show somebody in Japan you appreciate them, give them something small from home. They call them omiyage, local snack, or something like that. Nobody expects it unless you're gonna live with them in their house or, you know, close relationships. But even if you go to a restaurant, something like that really shows you understand the culture and what works. Again, not like tipping, which apparently if you do, you'll explode. But I think it creates those moments of connection and creates stories that you'll have that make your trip different from anybody else's. Also act like you got some home training. Don't just be doing anything. So that's the 5. Slow down, look around the famous spots, pick the right windows, stay somewhere where people actually live, and talk to people with home training. And I don't think it's that complicated, but you have a lot of people that don't do it. That's why their trip ends up being like everybody else's. So if you actually want to know how to move through Japan without people thinking you're just some other tourist who doesn't get it, and overcrowding their cities or whatever, watch this next video, and I think that'll help you create some of those connection points and create that unique trip that people are going to ask you about when you go home.